welcome to today's session. I'm Sophia Ahmed, the training manager at IE Real Estate Institute, and IE brings you at another informative session as a part of its Open Knowledge Initiative, and we have many more sessions lined up for you. Now, Innovation Expert Real Estate Institute is authorized by the Dubai government and global accreditation bodies to train the real estate industry, and we offer various local and international certification courses and career development and advancement trainings as well. Today, IEREI, in collaboration with FIABCI Emirates, is bringing you the data privacy law and real estate industry topic. And not taking much of your time, I'd like to introduce today's presenters. So firstly, I would like to introduce Dr. Mahmoud AlBurai. He is a phenomenal leader, and we had the great privilege working under his leadership for over 10 years at the Bauland Department as CEO of Dubai Real Estate Institute. Dr. Mahmoud wears multiple hats. Currently, he is serving as senior advisor at the Real Estate Regulatory Agency, which is RERA, and is also the founding president of FIABCI Emirates and the chairman of UN Global Compact, UAE. And our second speaker would be Dr. Shahram Safai. He is a partner at Afridian Angel. He heads the firm real estate practice and represents stakeholders in the industry, including government entities. Dr. Shahram is a qualified solicitor in England and Wales and a member of the California State Bar. Dear doctors, the session is all yours now.
Thank you so much, Sophia, and thank you everyone for attending today's session. As you know, Dubai real estate market has been maturing over the last few years. So we had a lot of important milestones throughout the way, from the time we started the freehold till 2008, when we had the first recession and maybe drop in the prices, and with COVID 2020. So all these changes and all these things triggered a lot of positive changes in the structure of the real estate industry. So one of the most important things is that recently, or a few years ago, the European Union introduced something called GDPR, or General Data Protection Regulation. And this is to protect the data and privacy of people. It's not about real estate. So today, our focus on the real estate part of the federal law of the United Arab Emirates, law number 45 of 2021. This law was passed last year, and this law means a lot of things for the real estate industry. What it means for real estate industry is the focus of today's session with Dr. Shahram. What it means for us as a real estate industry. Can we share the data? Can we call? Can we do owners or people that we have their data have the right to be forgotten? What are the penalties? What are the, at the same time, how to get around this in a legal way and make sure that it doesn't impact our businesses? So on behalf of FIABCI, International Real Estate Federation, Emirates chapter, I would like to ask Dr. Shahram to present us what it means and the major parts of this federal law and when it is going to be implemented and the way forward. So Dr. Shahram, the floor.
Thank you, Dr. Mahmoud. Always good seeing you and speaking at this webinar with you. So we're here to talk about the UAE data protection law. You see what's happening in this market, is it's been happening for 20 years, 25 years, is that increasingly we're getting more regulation and laws to come up to, if you like, international best practices. And when we do that, the more we do that, the more we can share the best clients, the best funds, pension funds, and our real estate market then gets elevated to a standard that we didn't have 20, 25 years ago. And so this is part of that measure. It's a measure that talks about protecting people's personal information. And the legislation for that is already in Europe, is already in the United States. And now we're talking about this same legislation that's come to the UAE very recently. So it's the UAE Data Protection Law. Let's move to the next update really quickly. The next slide, I mean. Yeah, next slide. Thank you. So, oops, I think you skipped a slide. You'd like to go back one. Thank you. So this is Federal Law 45 of 2021. And it's a law that was effectively enacted in 2021, but is only recently come into force. And we'll talk about the dates for that and when it came into force. The good news about this law is that it's very similar in concept to other data protection laws. So if you come from Europe or to an extent from the United States or other places, you'll already be familiar with these concepts, or Singapore or Japan or places like that. I guess on the flip side of that coin, the bad news is, well, or perhaps a little bit of good news, is that more regulation to comply with. Why more good news or bad news in the sense that you have to comply with more laws, etc., and you have to know what you're doing, and we'll talk about that. But the good news is we're coming up more and more to that international best standard, which I've always been a big supporter of, and this is getting us to that. So that is what it's for. Now, who does the UAE personal protection law apply to? Traditionally, there was no law, data protection law, that applied. If you wanted to know how data protection worked, if you had personal data about yourself, where you lived, how tall you were, when were you born, your preferences for purchases, all these things, these were protected in a hodgepodge of laws, starting with the Constitution, cybersecurity law, and their penal code, the criminal law. Now then, we have this one law, and it applies to, as stated in the law, people who live or have a business in the UAE. That's one category of person that it applies to. Secondly, it applies to any business in the UAE that processes personal data. And personal data is data about an individual that can identify them. It can include sensitive data and other types of data, biometric data. And three, any business which is not in the UAE, this is interesting, but that processes personal data of people in the UAE, of those in the UAE. I'll give you an example. Let's say there is a real estate brokerage, and it is not in the UAE, it's actually in London, but yet it deals with data of UAE residents because it's trying to market to them or it's sold to them before. It will also be captured by this law. So you're looking for that connection with the UAE, with people in the UAE, and that's how this law applies. Let's move on to the next slide, please. Now, when you're looking at this law, it's important to understand that it has certain principles that guide the law. This principle of fairness, transparency, and lawfulness, meaning that when they process, when they use the information that you give them as, as a customer giving broker information, that information must be used fairly, transparently, and in a legal manner. There has to be a clear and specific purpose on how you use it, and the use has to be limited to the purpose for which you've set it out for as a broker, and not be used for, a marketing for purchasing cars or other things that were not contemplated generally. It has to be accurate, so there must be accurate data, and it can be updated when necessary, and we'll talk about that. And it must be secure and confidential. This is an obligation the law puts on you to keep this data secure and confidential. You can already see, just at the beginning of this discussion about the law, that you're already, as an entity that's dealing with the personal data of individuals, having these obligations that you're going to have to figure out how to handle. Fair, transparent, lawful, has to be accurate, but it must be secure and confidential. How do you ensure that security? Writing it in a book that gets passed from one person to another is probably not sufficient. definitely not sufficient. And so there's methods by which this is done in other countries, and I'm sure we will follow this very carefully as well. So all personal data has to be secure, confidential. And after you've finished with the data for the purpose that you've laid it out for, then it should be erased, or it can be made anonymous so you can't identify who the person is. But there's various ways to then not have the liability for that personal data. So you want to be careful then not have liability for that personal data for beyond a certain time, because whereas before this law, you may have thought, well, it's useful. Maybe I can use it for other things. I can sell it as a database, etc. And we all know that's done. Once this law kicks in even more, and we'll talk about when that is, you'll find that the data is more actually of a liability to an extent. You have to be careful how you deal with it. And you probably want to get rid of it once you've used it to the extent that you're authorized to do so. And so that takes us to the last bullet there, consent. Consent is an overarching theme of this law, of the UAE data protection law. Not only for this law, but also for the law in Europe, the GDPR, as well as other laws. Consent of the person whose information you have. That consent must be informed. They must know why they're giving you the information. It must be specific to the reason you want to use that information, and it must be clear or unambiguous. So you can see the standards to which you're being held. There's exceptions to that consent, which is in the law, such as protection of the public interest, defending a legal claim, but it won't apply generally to doing business unless it's an exception. Thank you very much. So moving on to the next slide. What do businesses do then? What should they do to comply? And the answer to that is, well, you're going to have policies, procedures, and measures on how to comply. We as a law firm, of course, as a Freudian Angel, we've been here 50 years, and we have a data protection practice, and we advise clients on programs that they have and issues they may have or breaches and all this. And there are other advisors, and we'll talk about a data protection officer in a second as well. But the things that you're going to have to do is you must put in place policies, procedures, measures to comply. And I would say they have to be written, because somebody at some stage will have a problem with the data that you've taken and used. And you're going to have to defend yourself by saying, you see, we had these written policies, we had these procedures, we made it secure, we made it confidential, and we did what was correct pursuant to the law to be able to defend yourself. Otherwise, you will be responsible, and damages and lawsuits, etc. So the things you have to do and be cognizant of is a right to obtain information that has to be implemented. How do you use that personal information? You have to send notices and tell them, how that information is being used and ask for their consent. Also, there's a right of access. Individuals have a right to access their personal information that you hold on their behalf. They can ask you what it is that you hold and what you're using it for. They can ask for it to be erased or corrected if it's incorrect, because you have to have their consent. There's a right to restrict or stop processing, which they can also do. If in these rights that people have, things go wrong, then they also have a right to complain under the law. And the complaint is usually made to you first, to either your lawyer who is acting for you in these matters, whether they work for you in-house or whether it's a law firm like us, a Freudian Angel. Or if you're dealing with so much information, which is very sensitive data, or the volume is very high under certain circumstances, then you would need a data protection officer. And that data protection officer would deal with that, kind of like a chief financial officer, but this time for data. But that's only in certain circumstances that the law requires to have a data protection officer. And so they also have the right to withdraw consent, which we've talked about. And really one of the worst things that can happen in these situations is to have a data security and have a breach with respect to data security. And if there is a breach, why would that breach happen? Either someone hacks your system, if it's digital, which it usually is, or it's negligently leaked. And both have happened in this world, and we've read about them, the big ones. but they happen, often. And these issues come up often all over the world, and they will happen here as well. They already have in many cases. If that happens, and the law says you have to notify the UAE Data Office, it's a federal government office that needs to be notified of the breach. And if it prejudices the data holder, the person whose data it is, then they have to be notified as well. So we talked about data protection officer, and data protection officers generally are needed in only specific circumstances. You can always have one if you want, but it is an additional expense. But generally the law says you need a data protection officer if you have a high level of risk on processing information that is personal data, which has a lot of privacy to it. If you're using sensitive technology and dealing with sensitive information, or you're doing a great volume of data. So those are specific reasons why you must have one by law. And then if you choose and you don't fall into any of those, then you can have one if you like. So that's a data protection officer. It's a new concept. I'm sure most of you may not be familiar with it, but it is something that's definitely coming, and you'll hear about it as we go forward. So then what about critical and challenging issues? Let's talk about some of the issues. There was just a comment about examples. I've given you some examples of, I'll give you more. I've given some examples of how data breaches can happen through hacking or someone releases them. What information are we talking about? When you talk to a customer and you get information from them about, could tell me, what is it you own? How much is it? What's the square footage? And who are you? And give me a copy of your passport. And where were you born? Give me your background, KYC. This is all personal data. This is what we're talking about. This is the information that you are obliged to keep confidential and secure and to deal with. This is the topic of this discussion and this law. And so these are these, and then what happens with that data? I'll give you a clear example of what happens now, which probably will not happen once this law goes into effect, which is all these cold calls that we receive from brokers with respect to phone numbers that have been released and names, etc., of properties owned by people and the lists being sold. That would be in breach of this law for sure, and would attract liability and other punishments. So I think the practice of real estate and how you market will change as one example of this law. And that's a big one for some of you. I'm sure some of you bank on that type of marketing, and that will change, plus so many other things, because we are stepping up to the next level of how we operate as a country. And that I think is a very good thing. So let's go to this slide and start talking more about it after those examples. So some issues that we need to be aware of. Cross-border transfers. So this personal information that we've gotten could be transferred across the border from UAE to London, to Saudi, to Oman, to Spain. How would that happen? Well, that happens with most organizations out here, because most organizations here are either international in nature or do business internationally with their networks, or they have agents, etc., and they're going across borders. I know my daily work as a lawyer is very international. I'm dealing with different countries in different time frames, as well as local countries in GCC, but it's varied. And so if I reflect the average market participant here, I think a lot of people here are cross-border, are international, and they're doing cross-border transfer of this data. And so the law talks about that. If you process data in the UAE, then you can only send it outside if the market that you're sending it to and the entity you're sending it to meet certain conditions. And so they have to meet these conditions of security and confidentiality and being able to and the consent. All those things have to be in place. And it's only when you have those in place and you've evidenced them, you've kept records that you're satisfied, etc., that you would send that. Now, who wouldn't have to comply with this? Well, I guess if you're in the UAE, you don't deal with anyone, any entities outside the UAE, all your suppliers are here, you're a completely local product. And I don't know too many entities like that, honestly. I think most of the entities I run across one way or another have some type of international component, at least customers that are abroad and they're dealing with agents abroad, etc. So keep that in mind, that cross-border transfers, although initially you may think it doesn't apply to you, if you really dig deeper into your business, you'll see that you may be transferring this personal data internationally, and you have to comply with that. The second bullet to talk about is this issue of controller versus processor. I know it sounds boring, but it's not so boring under the law, because it is these are terms that are defined. The controller is the chap who effectively controls the data, the broker, perhaps the broker where the information has been given to. And the processor is, for example, the marketing agent that's been given that data by the broker saying, yes, we got this information for buying units in Dubai Marina, but now we want to try and sell them timeshare in Deira. Different products, different purposes, and please come up with a marketing campaign for us. Controller being the broker, processor being the marketing agent, and both having different obligations, but both being subject to confidentiality and all these security requirements. And so it's very important to understand who you are, whether you're a controller and processor, and what your obligations are. Controllers having higher obligations, but both actually having obligations in any event. The third data point is something I hope it never happens to you, but unfortunately it does statistically happen to businesses, and that's data breaches. We talked about it already. Your data gets leaked, your IT guy presses the wrong button. There's a virus that gets into your system by mistake, I'm not saying intentionally, and the data gets leaked. There's a virus that gets into your system intentionally and you're hacked and it gets leaked. And so you've got a breach. Either of those, any of those are breaches. Doesn't matter how it came out, it just came out. The information is now out, that private information about these people, their passport copies, how tall they are, where they came from, their nationality, their political affiliations, their religion, etc., all gets out. It was not supposed to get out. What do? Well, step number one, IT immediately needs to stop that breach. It's like a dam that breaks. Band-aid that dam, keep the water in as much as you can, get back, as much of that as that data as you can, given the technical solutions that you have. B, you have to report it to the UAE data office by law. You have to report it to the federal government and say, this has happened to me. These are the measures I've taken. This is the compliance I did. I've done everything right. Look at all my procedures, etc. And that's why I'm saying it's very important to have those in place. And then report it to the person who has, whose subject information is leaked, the individual, if there's prejudice to them as a result, and usually there will be. And then, of course, work with your lawyers. If you're much larger, work with your data protection officer as well as your lawyers to come up with your strategies, how you're going to defend these breaches and the cases and the liabilities that come both in court as well as at the UAE data office, the federal government, because there'll be two complaints at least. One with the federal government, an administrative complaint because of the breach, and secondly, if there are damages, then in court. So I hope that never happens to any of you. It goes without saying that given what I'm talking about, I think it's obvious, but I'm going to say it anyway. What we don't want to do is to destroy or hide any information as to what's happened, because it will be uncovered. We're talking about technical information. Technical information is easily uncovered through post-mortem IT. And so it's very important to be upfront with everything that has happened, the steps you've taken. And if you have, caused harm, etc., then it's something we're going to have to live up to and try to minimize the damage that's been done. So again, hoping it does not happen for any of you. And then the last bullet here, subject access request. That simply means a request from a person to review the data that you have on him or her. Say, what do you have on me? And you give that information, and then the person says, well, no, I want you to correct this now. You have the wrong data. This is not my passport copy. No, this is not where I live. No, I don't own in downtown. I own Marina, whatever it may be. So this is something that the law allows. Now, one thing I want you to know is that this subject access request under law is being used as a tool by lawyers when they get into disputes. That is not the purpose of it under the law, but that is what lawyers are doing. So if your company starts receiving a whole bunch of subject access requests, tell me what my data is, tell me what my data is, I want you to correct this, and it's far more than usual, you're probably going to be sued, or you're in the middle of being sued and they're just putting more pressure on you. So you have to understand that this law, although the purpose of it is to protect data, personal data, it is used as a tool in litigation, both in courts as well as in arbitration. And we expect that to increase just because we've seen that in Europe as well as in the United States. Let's go to the next slide, please. So then coming up towards the end of this presentation, our last slide, let's talk about some timelines and expectations on enforcement. This law, as I mentioned, as Dr. Mahmoud also mentioned, is a 2021 law, but it says it comes into force on 2nd January 2022. So it's already come into force. That's about 2 months ago. But what we have now, and I've read through this law several times, is a law that gives you the principles and the things that should be done, but it doesn't give you the nitty gritty. It doesn't give you the, it doesn't tell you where the rubber hits the road or how, all the details that you need to follow exactly. That's coming. Those details are coming in what's called the executive regulations, which are going to be issued by 2nd July 2022. So we can have another chat again once that's issued, because at that stage, we will have a lot more to talk about how this is done, what the liabilities are, what the penalties are, all these things. All the details that were required will come 2nd July 2022. And the law came into force now, 2nd January 2022. So the law also says, and this is important to bear in mind, the third date to bear in mind, is that it gives businesses an additional 6 months from 2nd July 2022 to comply with the law. So you have until 2nd January 2023 to comply. But if I were a business, I would start thinking about this right now and putting your programs together. Because by 2nd January 2023, when compliance occurs, that complaint and issues may come on 3rd January 2023, and everything has to be in place. All protections have to be there. The IT guy, the data protection officer, to the extent it applies to you, the law firm you're dealing with, lawyers who are advising you, all this has to be there to provide you with the protections that you need in case that comes. So you need to get a good head start on this to make sure you've implemented all this, as you will definitely need to according to this law. And the last point is this issue of enforcement. And okay, so now Shahram, you've told us about this law, that's great. But you know, this place has been pretty easygoing. They really haven't focused on the privacy of a lot of personal data. It's easily obtainable. You know, what's going to happen? What do you think? Well, you know, it remains to be seen for sure, but I think this law is a very strong indication that data protection is going to become very important to them. And they're going to start cracking down on personal data being sold in Excel spreadsheets, et cetera, as they have been in this town for a long time. As well as other information like that, whether it's in real estate, banking, or otherwise, and we're sort of knowledgeable about all those as far as what's been done. I think a lot of that's going to stop, and they're going to stop that with penalties and potentially even criminal stuff, because they don't want this jurisdiction to have that reputation. Interestingly, I think that procedure and that policy, which this law pushes forward, is also in compliance with the culture of the UAE and the peoples of the UAE, in that it is more conservative. There is a concept of privacy, and not all information is available for public dissemination. That is a fact, and that's throughout many laws in the UAE and Dubai and other Emirates. And so I think this is very much in line with what we're going to see going forward. So it's important to be ready for a more conservative culture when it comes to the sharing of personal data and liability for entities. And with that, I will hand it back to Dr. Mahmoud.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Shahram, for the very informative session. And I think it's, as you said at the end, it's important for us to act on it now in a way that data is, as you know, data is a strategic thing. It's a resource, it's an asset. We need to use it the right way. We protect people, but we need also to make sure that we have our own measurements and our strategies at the organization level to make sure that this not become a disadvantage to us. So let's open the floor for questions from the participants to see what their concerns about. There's several regulations from RERA regarding cold calling and all these things, but I think this is a more comprehensive law that will impact your businesses. So let's open it up for questions. So whoever wants whoever has a question, please raise your hand digitally so we give you the floor.
Or they can also type their questions in the chat box if they want to.
Mm-hmm. So, Dr. Shahram, in case if people feel that their data has been violated and the privacy has been violated, what is it that they can do? What kind of compensation they can ask for? And then I ask Moe to ask the second question.
Sure. Well, I mean, they haven't specified, but it's clear, and we'll see that more in the regulations when it comes out in July. But I think that it's clear that damages that they've suffered as a result of the, breach of the law and dissemination of this information will definitely be recoverable. And on top of any damages they can prove that they've suffered, I'm sure that there'll be a penalty that will be imposed to prevent, and serve as a notice to the market that this is not how you should be operating. So it's that type of measure of damages that I expect. And whether there are it gets to any criminal sanctions, we're going to have to see. But for sure, there will be damages.
Great. Moe, if you have a question.
Yeah. Doctor, I had a quick question. How is it going to be, like, is it going to be traceable, like an IP address, who sent this data to this one? How's it going to be traced, like from following from the line that, like, let's say it was a cold call, and then let's say the guy who's been receiving the call, he said, okay, I want to submit a complaint that I've been receiving so many calls. So how are we tracing this data leakage?
I think Dr. Mahmoud can probably talk about the practicalities of that, but I'll speak generically and then hand it back to Dr. Mahmoud from a RERA perspective. But I would say that, from an IT perspective, this is all digital. And especially in this very safe environment that we live in this wonderful country that we live in, it's all detectable. And to the extent that you provide a number where you've received this call, and it goes to the UAE data office and they want to follow up, it is a very easy thing to track down. I don't think it'll present any difficulty from a technical perspective. But yeah. Dr. Mahmoud,
even the telecom operator, Shahram, sorry, I mean, they could be asked to give a report of where they received the call from or what calls they have made. So this is, it's easy to trace more. It's not difficult.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah. I think that's the easiest part. Yeah, it's the easiest part.
Other questions?
I don't have a question, Dr. Mahmoud, but I also I've been part of this market for 17 years. And I know everyone now from some companies, this is their business model, this is what they do for a living to gain listings and transactions. And there are others who are trying to work hard to gain business otherwise. So I just want to maybe I want to share with people who are now thinking, oh my God, my business is going to stop or my income is going to become less. This is already applicable in big countries. Europe, US, Australia, all the main big economies abide by this. and they have flourishing businesses, and they have good growing and expanding their businesses worldwide. So this could be a hiccup for us at first, because of course, you know how change is difficult, but we shouldn't be frightened by this, because we should be able to, all of us have clients that are happy to refer more clients, and we will have more clean ways to reach clients than what the habits were in the past. So please, everyone, don't freak out and don't think it's the end of the world, because it's just one way to clean our market and make it even better.
Absolutely, Dunya. I agree with that 100%. It's, you know, it's kind of like talking about, money laundering and how we take measures to make sure that customers are proper and clean money. It's not criminal money, because at the end of the day, that makes our market more viable. It makes it a better market. It attracts bigger money, it attracts funds, pension funds, investments, funds, all these things. This is a very similar concept. We're building up to something much, much bigger. And so I absolutely agree with that, Dunya. Thank you so much for that comment.
We have a question from Aravadas Hussein. He's saying, in case of exclusive agency contact, so is that a problem? Like if you are an exclusive agent of a person and you have their contacts. So I don't think that's an issue, right, Doctor?
If you're an exclusive agent for a customer, then you have their information, yes, and you should keep it confidential and secure as discussed. But it doesn't, change anything necessarily, yeah.
So getting people's data throughout official channels, let's say I do a campaign and I get their interest, this is a legal way of getting their numbers, right? Because they register their interest, they're interested in your property, they ask for a call. So this is this is a correct way of doing it. But how we use data and the purpose of it and the right to be forgotten, all these things are important, right? So if I ask you, please erase my number, I'm not interested anymore, then you should do so. And that's why maybe RERA last year introduced something called the green listing, whereas we give the owners the right to choose to be called or not to be called. So if you see that this owner is red, this means don't call him, he's not interested. Anyways, I'm not sure how is the practicality of that. I don't see a lot of people are using. Another question here. Who's this? Just see. Okay, Vinay.
It's actually Elizabeth, right?
Can you read the question, Sophia? Because I have.
Sure, I'll do that. So, as we enforce the data privacy law, can we also clean our market by having exclusivity on properties and agents?
One more time, can you read that? I didn't quite get that question.
So he's saying, as we enforce the data privacy law, could we also clean our market by having exclusivity on property and agents?
So I see, I think I know what she's saying. She's saying, well, we're trying to make the market better. And one way to do that is to let's have exclusivity, and that'll make the market even more clear, etc. I think they're two different things. Good suggestion. Always good to talk about it. They're two different things. One is talking about keeping information that's given to you in confidence, secure and private. It's like someone says, "I'm telling you this. Don't abuse this information." That's one thing, and that's the concept behind this law. And I agree with it, and I think that it's the right thing to do. The other is the question of an open market. And capitalism, and whoever is the best service provider will become the best broker. So we cannot sit there and mandate exclusivity, but if you're good enough to get exclusivity and sign that contract and to then make that sale or purchase, etc., then of course you have the right. But I don't see the government going away from this open sort of capitalistic approach that we have to try and mandate exclusivity, just based on what I've seen from this government, if that's what you mean.
I think even if you have exclusivity, Shahram, you still have to treat that data the same way.
Yes.
The data protection will
Correct.
apply, whether it's exclusive or it's open or
I
whatever kind of data you get. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely right. No, that doesn't change your obligations in the data. You still have to keep it confidential. Agreed. Thank you, Elizabeth. Is there another question, Shobia?
There are some agencies tie up with different brokerage from outside the UAE.
Right.
How does it comply? Oh, how does it comply, in other words? Yeah.
Yeah, good question.
Okay.
So these agencies that, maybe they're agents of that company and they are the agents here, either by name or by contract. And therefore, they will be exchanging information about these customers. Perhaps a certain nationality that comes here that they want to sell to or market to. For sure, that is a cross-border transfer. That's a classic cross-border transfer of data. And that cross-border transfer of data under the law requires that you make sure that the entities have similar requirements and they're maintaining that confidential and secure border data that has to be complied with. Any other questions, Sean?
Well, so far none.
Any other questions that you have?
Good morning, Dr.
No more questions in the chat box. Okay, Mr. Saad.
Yes.
Anyone?
Good morning, everyone, and it is a pleasure to be part of this conference today. Doctor, just I have a question between the difference between the commercial and residential for giving a notice to evacuate the property. Could you please advise and make it more clarify for us, please, for that notice period? If you want to sell the same property, or the landlord would like to vacate the same tenant. Thank you so much.
Sure. So I'll talk generally. First of all, this has nothing to do with data protection law. This is on landlord-tenant law, and I'll just give you my understanding of that. As you know, there's a 12-month advance notice that needs to be given for only 3 reasons. Either you want to sell it, move into it, or it has to be demolished. And each one has its conditions. And that 12-month advance notice is in writing, generally takes a certain form, and is generally done through a notary public, that's the Dubai court, in order to be able to give proof that it's been served or tried.
Sorry. Okay, this is for residential, right?
That applies to both.
Okay, because yesterday we have a case for warehouses. They mentioned that the law said that they have 2 years. So this just I want to reconfirm with them.
The law, it's possible by procedure. The law itself is not has not been separated yet. There are draft laws for commercial as well as residential, but as far as I know, it's still only one law. And I'm not familiar with 2 years for warehouses. Perhaps it's a RERA procedure, but I'm not familiar.
Okay, thank you so much.
Pleasure.
So we should go back to the RERA to reconfirm that.
Absolutely.
Even if someone have this confirmation, I really appreciate this information, because they said logically for the commercial, it take a long time to set up the new place. So this is only a question. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Hi, Doctor. So we have a question. We have a question from Mr. Winay. One of my Syrian clients wants to invest big money in Dubai. What are the necessary steps we should take?
There's a client who wants to. Did you say a Syrian client?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a Syrian client who wants to invest big. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you have a Syrian client who wants to invest in Dubai, again, this is not necessarily data protection, but I would say that, immediately you should check to make sure that there are no sanctions that are applicable to Syrian nationals for investment in the UAE. Once you get that cleared and you're okay with that, then you want to do your KYC, your know your client. to make sure that you know this person, you have a passport copy, you know their business and their source of money, source of funds. And then once you have that clear, then you're really on a good path to try and have that person invest in Dubai. But you need to get those two things from a legal compliance perspective cleared before you facilitate that investment.
Okay, so there's another question from Mr. Arafat. When we host a roadshow in different countries on behalf of the UAE developers, some agencies from those countries attend the event and bring their clients to us. Is it good to deal with them or not?
This is a business question. I'm happy to answer it, but Dr. Mahmoud, I'm sure you've got a better answer than I do.
No, so sorry again, Sophia. He's going to approach and he
a
has some
roadshow.
brokers. Yes.
Yeah. So it's a roadshow which is hosted in different countries on behalf of the local developers, UAE developers. Some agencies from those countries attend the events and bring their clients to them. So they're asking if this is good or not. Is it good to deal with those clients or not?
Yes, why not?
Or the agencies?
I don't see any issue. And actually we're working now on something on that, linking with international agencies. We're doing a regulation on that part of, there is a work on a new law for brokers, and part of it is such international deals. So I don't see any issue. Of course, I mean, Dubai is an international market. We don't want to ruin our international status. We want to attract investors. We want to work. We want to partner. The only thing, we respect people's privacy and use the data the right way. This is the only thing. So we don't need to look at it as a limiting thing. However, consent of your partner, consent of your customer is important. You tell them what you want to do, and then they say, yes, you want to be part of our show, please register your interest. So this is a consent from them saying, yes, we agree to be part of this event. Then we are going to use your data for future communication about opportunities in Dubai. Yes, yes. So I don't think there is an issue, Dr. Shahram.
I agree with you. I think it's a good thing. You want to connect with them. You want to broaden your marketing network. And I agree with Dr. Mahmoud.
All right, so I would like to ask you a question. We would like to know more about the FIABCI membership program. A lot of people ask me that question. So, I mean, about the FIABCI membership program.
I really I would love to see some of you joining the International Real Estate Federation. We have a UAE chapter we started last month. So it's a database of 1.5 million brokers all over the world, and you're connected with all of them. So it's an opportunity to be part of this entity, and we're working very closely with IE Real Estate Institute on full programs and activities and even education programs. So it's a connectivity, it's a connection benefit. We have members in 65 countries, 1.5 million members. So if you're interested, please get in touch with Sophia and myself.
All right, any other questions from our participants? Okay, so I would like to thank Dr. Mahmoud and Dr. Shahram for enlightening us with such crucial knowledge and providing an opportunity to network globally and add to our credibility. Dear participants, we'd love to hear from you. Your feedback is very crucial for us to improve our upcoming sessions. We have sent you the feedback link already, so please do provide us with your feedback, and we would like to know which other topic would you like us to offer. You may stay updated with our upcoming sessions via our official website, which is www.ierei.ae. Now, kindly accept IERE's team's sincerest gratitude for investing your valuable time in attending this webinar. Stay safe, stay blessed. Bye for now. Thank you so much.
And do business. Don't worry at all. Do your business.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Shahram.
Thank you. Thank you.
Dr. Mahmoud, thank you. Good to see you all.